Welcome to a fresh new episode of Catalyzing Conversations. My name is Jahara, and I'm the founder and CEO of Catalyst Labs, who's bringing this talk to you. I'm really excited to be able to introduce our speaker for today's session, Adnan Haider. I've known Adnan for many years, and so we'll take the liberty of calling him a friend. He is a uber smart young man, and we are very fortunate to have him with us today. Adnan leads analytics at Zafin, a Toronto-based fintech. He has previously held global roles with IBM in financial services and advanced analytics. Adnan has a master's degree from Duke University and is a Fulbright scholar. He serves on the advisory board of the University of Toronto Rotman's Analytics program and can also be found expressing strong opinions on lootmar.com. So do check that out. Adnan will be speaking to us today on outcomes, not outputs, analytics product development. So over to you, Adnan.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks, Johanna. And I think when you say it's like when you say young, when you introduced me as a young man, that was probably your introduction from 10 years back. But it's realities have changed now. So very happy to be here. And when I arrived in Karachi, and obviously I went over to see Jahan, as I always do. And I learned the awesome work that's happening in the tech ecosystem generally, and that Catalyst Labs is doing in particular. Then I was very interested to speak to the team here. And the topic that I want to talk about is really fundamentally it's product management, how to build products that matter. And when we do that for analytics, there's added excitement and complexity, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'll start sharing my screen. Just bear with me. Okay, so can you see my slide share? Okay, perfect. So look, let me, so Jahan already introduced me. I don't want to spend much time talking about this, but I did want to talk a little bit about my journey into the product world, because I've been in the product world off and on since I started my career. It started out in 2007, which is when I got together with a couple of friends and started a medical device non-profit called Imagine, which was for focused on cervical cancer prevention in low resource settings, like Tanzania, Haiti, etc. And it was a medical device company. So we built the prototypes and got the funding, and then handed that over to a larger non-profit to run with. After that, I started lootmar.com, and this was an online marketplace for Pakistan. I realized that there wasn't at the time a platform where people could buy and sell, and that was lootmar.com. Lots of lessons learned in building lootmar.com. It was ahead of its time. Happy to talk about that, since it was a very exciting journey. But at the end of towards the end, as often happens with failed startups, I ran out of money and I needed a job, and that's when I joined IBM in Dubai, which was the headquarters for Middle East, Africa, as well as Central Europe. And I did some really interesting work because this was my opportunity to move from startups to move to a company that is a large company and that works with other large companies. So in this role, I did a number of interesting things, from nanotech commercialization for an Eastern European government to building an interactive patient care product that went into hospitals, and then from there focusing a lot on financial services, specifically focused on mobile banking, digital banking, helping banks build digital products that, in a way, responding to some of the disruptions that were happening in the market. And then finally, the last 2 years that I was at IBM, I was very deeply focused on real-time analytics, and I'll share some of the lessons learned and why they're applicable to product analytics, product management, specifically from this example. And then now I'm actually with a very exciting company. It's the company Zafin, based out of the company headquartered out of Toronto, and And when people hear the word fintech, they often think of consumer fintechs. Like, so for example, they think of banks like Atom Bank or N26 or Monzo, or they think of robo-advisors like Betterment, etc. So that is an exciting space. That's the space that gets a lot of the headlines. But underneath that space, there's a very exciting category of enterprise fintechs. These are the fintechs that are modernizing the plumbing on which international finance works. So Zafin is one of the leaders in that category, and that's where I am today, leading analytics product development. So now, throughout my career, from the medical device startup to many years in consulting and product development for a really large tech company, to working now for a successful fintech, there's one thing that I've noticed, which is that it's all about outcomes. And let's spend a little bit of time to understand what outcomes actually are. Well, is there a framework that we can put around outcomes that'll help us think through them, because they're clearly that important. One useful framework that I found and I've used is a jobs to be done framework. This framework was popularized by Clay Christensen. It's one of the recommended readings that I'll share at the end of this talk as well. And when we think about a job to be done, the underlying concept is that when we build a product, we should think about the end user of that product and what's the specific job that end user wants done. In other words, where does he or she want to make progress? Does the person want to, in the case of a recruitment solution, find a job? In the case of a driving solution, does he want to actually find a way to the destination without getting lost? What is the specific progress that the person wants to make? The end customer, so the users of our product. But identifying the area in which the person wants to understand, when starts working on something, then they have these grand generations that we just want to revolutionize this, or we want to revolutionize that. That's often not good enough. What we need to understand a very specific group of customers, understand specifically where they want to make progress and in what circumstance. So, for example, if you're building a solution that helps marketers send out offers, then what does progress mean in that case? Does progress mean that they want to send offers out more quickly? Does it mean that they want to actually improve the conversion ratio from X to Y? And what is circumstance in that specific, right? So does in those circumstances. So, for example, does it mean that they need to deal with a lot of red tape in their departments to get an offer out? That's why they struggle with that. So it's really important to understand where you want to make progress, the specific circumstance, and of course, what are the emotional and social needs of the person. This applies, people often think that addressing emotional and social needs is only important for consumer products or consumer tech products. That's not the case. It's equally important for business to business or enterprise products. So now let's make this real. So let's take an example from consumer finance. Making progress might mean that there's a particular customer that we are targeting, and that customer does not want to be hit by overdraft fees. Now, overdraft fees is more of a phenomena in Europe and North America, in which if you're low balance and you get a transaction that tips you into negative balance, then the bank actually charges quite a hefty overdraft fees. So in this case, the making progress, just avoiding overdraft fees is making progress for a particular segment of the user base. But then, okay, so that's progress, but what is the specific circumstance of this group of customers that we are targeting? The specific circumstance could be that this is a low-income group, a low-income person, and the person is just living paycheck to paycheck. So any unexpected charges from the bank can literally tip the person over into bankruptcy or into poverty. And then it's also important to understand the emotional needs. What are the emotional and social needs for this particular job to be done? And it's sometimes these things can be like really visceral, like so because of the money stress, people might be grinding their teeth at night, unsure of where the next bill payment is going to be funded from. Or it could just be that this is the lead wage earner in the family, and they just don't want their family to worry about money all the time, right? So now we've taken something that basically looks like a prediction problem, that hey, we want to be able to predict overdraft fees, to really understand what is it for the end customer that this job means. How are they going to make progress? What is the specific circumstance for that end customer, and what are the emotional and social needs? Now, the reason I'm sharing this example is because it's personal. When I was in the US, I used to bank with this bank called Wachovia. This particular brand no longer exists. It went under during the global financial crisis. It was bought out by another larger company. And what happened was that when I was banking with them, and I was quite unaware at the time of how financial systems work, and suddenly I didn't expect some payments that were going to come in my bank account. There were some very modest, like a few dollars that were charged, that tipped my bank account into negative balance. And not just once, I got there were three, four transactions, very small transactions, that tipped it into negative balance. And what happened was that for every transaction, I got charged at the time was a very significant amount of the overdraft fees is actually quite a significant issue in North America in particular. Americans paid around $30 billion in overdraft fees, just in overdraft fees. And the people who pay overdraft fees are generally the most financially vulnerable people. So in a sense, there's the practice of charging overdraft fees can be construed as predatory because banks make a lot of money, and the people who end up paying these fees are the ones who are least able to do it. So now, what might a solution look like to this job to be done? And the job to be done being to help people avoid going into negative balance. Now, this is what it can look like, right? So, for example, a predictive alert in which you look at the cash flow of a particular account and identify that there is a significant probability that bank account might go into overdraft within the next 1 week or 2 weeks. And once you identify that there's a set of bank accounts that may go into overdraft, you can send a gentle nudge to the customer, notifying them of this risk and extending interest-free financing just to bridge them over, or low interest financing just to bridge them over. Right. So now notice that behind this is basically, it's a prediction problem. Behind this is an algorithm that is looking at the cash flows, and it is and it is notifying people when there's a certain event that's expected to occur. But it really takes understanding the specific job to be done, the specific circumstance of the customer, and what progress looks like. For us to be able to have a solution that is this elegant. So this is an example of an outcome, right? So the outcome here is not that, hey, we want to deliver an algorithm. The outcome here is, hey, no, we want to deliver like a notification alert. The actual outcome that we want to drive towards is to reduce the incidence of overdrafts among the financially vulnerable. And we work backwards from there to find what the right solution is. Now, it's on that note, it's important not to conflate outputs with outcomes. And this happens all the time, by the way, right? So a typical output mindset is, oh, my job's done when I submit the deliverable. And you find this most frequently in consulting companies, which are really deliverable and work product based, and IT departments, and generally support functions, right? And this is the world of Gantt charts. In large companies, you have spreadsheet managers, and all they're really responsible for is driving numbers on a particular spreadsheet. That's classic output mentality. Outcomes, on the other hand, it's almost like your job's never done because you're guided by a mission, and these missions are yes, they can be tracked on quarterly basis, but there's no such thing as mission accomplished, or it definitely takes a longer time horizon to accomplish a mission. And if you look at the landscape of companies, then product companies are often outcome focused, as opposed to consulting companies, IT departments, etc., or service companies. Product companies tend to be outcome focused, and within large companies, the line of business leadership is quite outcome focused, right? So the line of business, so say the head of mortgages in a bank, actually the outcomes for him are the size of the mortgage book, the default rates. These are all business metrics. These are outcomes. The functions that support him aren't always focused on outcomes, right? So it's outputs aren't necessarily bad. Some companies are premised on producing outputs, but if you want to produce high quality products that move markets, or that certainly make a dent in the world or in the segment that they're actually operating in, then we have to have an outcome centric mentality and not an output centric mentality. Okay, so now I want to cover some anti-patterns, right? Just for fun. Let's talk about how not to deliver outcomes, because what you see for those of you who are joining in from large companies, whether they're large tech companies or large conglomerates in general, you'll recognize a lot of these anti-patterns, which also explains why large companies find it very hard to deliver good products. And the large companies that do deliver good products are really remarkable companies because their culture enables them to do it. So the first anti-pattern is not getting out of the building, right? And my favorite example here is a controversial one, which is the Segway. Because when the Segway came out, it was supposed to revolutionize transportation. There were hundreds of thousands of these that were to be sold every quarter. And it was called like the biggest thing since the internet, right? So that was all the hype surrounding the Segway. But the problem with the Segway was that it was basically something that was meant for everyone. It was meant to be everything for everyone almost, and they didn't really have a specific focus market for the Segway. Like they did not have an unmet need identified that they would squarely identify and delight that particular segment of customers. And in a sense, this problem is likely because it likely originates because the people who work on products are very obsessed and fascinated by the technology potential. And they don't get out of the building to talk to customers, to identify the specific job to be done, to identify the specific needs that are unmet, the circumstances for those needs, and to delight that focused, narrow niche of customers first. So not getting out of the building is, to say the least, very problematic, and often it leads to products that are subpar, or that might be technologically quite ingenious, but that miss the mark from a market adoption perspective. The second one is top-down command and control, and this is especially prevalent in large companies, whether they're large, whether they're legacy tech companies or they're large companies in general. So what happens here is that ideas originate in the ivory tower. There are a couple of, either from a mandate that's coming from the board, or their management consultants that the board is recruited to really rekindle the innovation spirit of the company. And that's where the ideas are generated. And then from these top-down ideas, from like the top of the house, there's a business case that's made. And these business cases, there are weeks spent on business casing just to make sure that, hey, we need to make sure that there's a large and attractive market, and that there's a large TAM, right? So which is like the total addressable market is quite significant. And then from this elaborate business casing exercise, you have a roadmap. And this is often like a 5-year roadmap. That only top level executives can dream of, because everyone else knows that the whole industry changes in 5 years, and hence 5-year roadmaps are a bit moot. So then this roadmap is developed, this conceptual roadmap is developed, and then is lobbed over to the product and engineering team. And this product and engineering team, especially engineering, works in trenches. They take requirements. It's basically they go through the engineering ceremonies. And at this point, the company is pretending to be agile. They'll have all the agile buzzwords that, hey, we have scrums and we have retrospectives and all those things. But really, all it's doing this is classic waterfall world that operates well in a command and control environment, but actually doesn't operate well when you want to build, when you're working in an ambiguous environment, and we need to figure things out to make sure we're addressing the right problem. So top-down command and control, very predictable anti-pattern of how not to make good products. The third is hiring mercenaries. Now, this is something that John Doerr, the legendary VC at Kleiner Perkins, he popularized. And the concept here is that there are mercenaries, and mercenaries, you hire mercenaries. Think of mercenaries as outsourced product development teams or outsourced services teams, and they do exactly what they're told. So you give them a detailed spec, and that spec gets built. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got missionaries. Missionaries actually really care about your problem, and especially in early stage product development, the problem space is also ambiguous. So you need people who care about the space, who are okay working with ambiguity, and that's the kind of engineering talent you need. That's the type of product talent you need, and a sure shot way of actually building subpar products is to just go in with mercenaries, right? Because it's very hard to have a clear product spec that mercenaries can build out. And the next one is bringing design in too late. Because what happens is, this is especially relevant for analytics products, because analytics is something abstract. It operates, it operates in the back. But eventually, it's depending on the type of product that you're working on, those insights need to be surfaced to end users. And the challenge is that in analytics products, the focus is so much on data engineering, building the pipelines in data science, that user experience takes the back seat. So once all that work is done, a month before the final product needs to go live, someone approaches a visual designer and says, "Hey, can you make it look pretty?" That it doesn't work that way. We have to involve design right from the start to make sure that we are solving the right problem, that we've identified the right jobs to be done, and we are interfacing with the customer in a way that makes sense. And sometimes it might not be a graphic user interface at all. Sometimes it might just be an in-app notification. It might be a message, but it typically helps to have design upfront, involved upfront, as early as possible. So now those were the anti-patterns, right? So now let's look at some of the lessons that I've learned on building analytics products that delight. Okay, so now the first thing, and this might be a little bit predictable given this is the antithesis of command and control management, is the most important thing that I want to emphasize is an empowered product team. In this world, management sets the objectives. In other words, the management sets the scope as well as the outcomes that need to be driven, preferably quantitatively, and then management effectively gets out of the way. The end-to-end responsibility for the product resides with the product team, and the product team is inherently cross-functional. You've got it's typically 4 to 10 people. And this team works entirely autonomously, making decisions on architecture, on engineering, on design, and also on the specific requirements that should be delivered or that should not be delivered, right? So point number one, it's an empowered product team is often what differentiates mediocre product development efforts from ones that genuinely delight customers and make an impact on the market. The second one, and this is perhaps my favorite one, is to measure what matters, right? And I'll share a very provocative, opinionated perspective here. So what doesn't matter are things like timesheets, story points, burn down charts, velocity charts. I've seen product teams really obsess on velocities and burn downs and story points, and top executives inquiring about why the velocity slowed from X to Y. These things actually don't matter so much. Not that maybe you can track them, but you track them because they help you for engineering. Don't track them because they need to be reported out to top management. What matters are the metrics that are at the heart of the business problem that you're trying to solve, right? So if you're trying to actually build a content platform, then engagement matters. If you're building a marketing platform, then conversion matters. If it's in the industrial sector, which is a sector that I worked in when I was doing the real-time analytics product, it's about energy efficiency, it's about product quality, it's about production, and so on and so forth. These are outcomes that matter. Now, in order to drive these outcomes, yes, you'll have outputs, and some of those outputs need to be tracked. But the central thing that you should be measuring are the things that matter. And any time that you expend on measuring stuff that doesn't matter is usually a waste of time. Okay, so next up is that everybody sells, right? So in my very first job interview, here I was, a background in computer science and engineering, and I'm at my first job interview, and it's like, I actually don't see myself in sales, right? I saw myself in engineering. I saw myself in technical specializations, and my future manager had this to say. She said, "Everybody sells," and that's almost a life lesson, because everybody sells, and that's especially relevant when you're working in a product team. Because it's everybody's job to talk to customers. It's everybody's job to understand the business. So it's not just the product manager or the business analyst that needs to understand the business. Every engineer, data engineer, everyone needs to understand the business. The team needs to be comfortable to email prospects. The team needs to be comfortable to talk to prospects or customers to validate ideas for new product development. And just to emphasize, it's not the marketing team, or it's not the sales team. It is the product team that's doing this, that's working on the new product. It's the product manager for sure, but it's also the engineers, it's also the data analysts, it's also the data scientists. Because it's when you're doing new product development, which is kind of different for doing incremental features on an existing product. Everyone needs to sell the idea inside the company, and everyone needs to evangelize it outside the company. So everybody sells. Very important. A lesson that I've learned from product development. Next up is to understand the risks upfront. And in other words, thinking through why wouldn't this work? That's actually very important. And there are three categories of risk that I typically think through when I'm working on a new product initiative. The first is value risk, and this is by far, by orders of magnitude, the most important and the most pressing risk that needs to be addressed upfront. So this is why essentially value risk is, why would someone use it, right? Which is there enough value in it for someone to use it? The second is technical risk, which is essentially, can we build it? Is there any engineering risk that we need to think through? And the third one is data risk, which is specific to analytics products, which is where do we get, and can we get the data to train and run the models? So in one of the products that I worked on, I was the principal product manager for this. This is a real-time analytics product that I was mentioning. To understand the value risk was actually the most important thing that we had to do upfront. And this was challenging, because the high-level problem statement that we had was that we needed to use real-time analytics at scale to improve the production process, to optimize the production process. So at a high level, something like this makes a lot of sense, right? Who wouldn't want to improve the production process by applying advanced analytics and real-time data? But really, to understand and obviate the value risk, what we had to do was that we had to identify who the primary users were, and the primary users for this particular product, the first reference customer for this product, they were in Fort McMurray, and Fort McMurray is the middle of Canada. You can have minus 20 minus 30 degrees Celsius on a regular day in Fort Mac. So the weather's a lot of fun, and it's a full 3,000 kilometers from where I live, which is I live in Toronto, so it's a long way from Toronto. But what it takes is to step out of your home, step out of your office, immerse yourself in the customer environment. So we had to spend weeks on end, and it's not just me as the product manager. We were rotating the team members who was going there, the engineers, the data scientists, the data analysts. Everybody was going to spend time at the facility, understanding the context of the primary users, so that we could understand where the pain points actually were, and we could address the risk of, if we build it, then would they actually use it? So that's the value risk, and this is the hardest one to address. and you often can't do this without stepping out of the building. These days maybe you can step out of the building virtually by doing Zoom, but you get the idea. The next is technical risk. The technical risk is one that I don't worry about much, because engineering problems can be solved. And the best way is to do it through prototyping. That's what we did for this particular product. In this case, there were some real technical things that had not been done before. We had to ingest data from thousands of real-time sensors. And there were some technical considerations in that the industrial network is segregated from the IT network. So there were some technical risks that had to be addressed, and this was really prototyping. We made sure through prototypes that we could do it, and that was that. And the third risk, and this is a very real pressing risk for products that are focused on analytics, is the data risk, which is, and it's twofold really, which is, can we get data to train the model, and can we get data to run the model? And this is a longer running risk, this is something that's hard to address within 1 or 2 sprints. But what we did up front was that we got our hands on the real data, the real production data. It was a subset of the production data. We profiled this data and we validated that this is something that we can work through, and we identified specific risks related to data quality and completeness and mitigating measures for that. So addressing risks upfront when you start, especially when you're starting on a large, new, ambitious product, is very important. And then you can identify the risk and you can systematically identify the mitigating measures. Finally, it's one of the most important things is to deliver value quickly, because and this is especially relevant for analytics products, because what happens is that most people, all of us, love science experiments, especially for those of us who come from analytics and data science backgrounds. We want to do deep learning. We want to see if we can do like a multi-step optimization, real-time predictions, and the list goes on and on. So these are, I put these in the science experiment categories, because these things are exciting, but they take a long time to create value. And then you've got things that actually you can do to add value quickly. And often the types of problems that you see in this category can be solved using rule-based analytics, through real-time alerting, through dashboards. You'd be surprised how valuable these things alone can be. Simple statistical techniques. These things can be incredibly valuable, have real money in the bank for your end customers. And what I propose is, let's start here. Start with the small, easier analytics features that give you money in the bank, and this gives you the permission, the credibility, the funding to go take on the longer-term science experiments. So look, those were some of the. What I shared with you are by no means, it's not an exhaustive list. This is just lessons that I've learned in the trenches, both by looking at and being in environments that have anti-patterns, and working on successful products are the other lessons that I shared with you. Now, for further reading, these people who are interested in high-tech product development, I can't recommend these strongly enough. The first one is Measure What Matters. I mentioned John Doerr on one of my slides. He's one of the proponents of having missionaries and not mercenaries. That's That's John Doerr's book. Highly recommend that. The Inspired is one of the best books on product management. It's written by Marty Gagan, who's very well known in the industry, and of course Clay Christensen needs no introduction. In this book, he's introduced the jobs to be done framework, and how it can be used to really identify the right problem and make sure we're building products that excite. Lastly, if you enjoyed the content of this conversation, then I blog about these topics. The lootmar.com. This is as I called it, Lootmar, the folly of youth, and now I'm blogging here. So feel free to go and subscribe to get this content. Now I'll stop sharing, and if there are any questions, then I'd be very happy to take them.
Hi, Adnan, I think there's a question in the Q&A section. Is that something I can call it out for you? So it says, it's by Abdul Samad, who says a construction company would always be an output-driven company. So in that case, how do you justify being outcome-centric?
Yeah, so look, I'm more focused on product development here, and construction company, that sector, almost like if you're a consulting company as well, there's some sectors, there's some companies that I agree, that are output driven, that, you have to achieve a particular milestone. There's a project plan, there's a milestone, you have to achieve that milestone, and you get paid for it. So the framework that I was sharing, the outcomes framework, is really focused on high-tech product development. One can argue that in a construction company, the outcomes, the longer term outcomes, their business outcomes that need to be focused on, which is acquisition of new products, acquisition of new customers, profitability of individual projects. So there is potentially a way to think about outcomes in the context of a construction company, but I would agree that there's some companies that are and sectors that are inherently output based, because that's how the contracts are structured, and that's how companies get paid. So you have to adapt. There's no one size fits all. You've got to adapt it based on the context of the environment.
As a follow-up to that, Adnan, he's asking, what advice would you give fresh data scientists who eventually want to transition into a product development role?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that's something that I've actually seen happen. What I suggest for data scientists to go into product development roles, and specifically, I'm presuming that there's this product development and then there's product management, right? So and I can, because product, you can be a data scientist in a product development role. You could be a data scientist that is working on a product, as opposed to a data scientist that is working on ad hoc analysis, right? So that's a very natural transition, because teams that are building analytics products need data scientists. But I'm presuming, Samad, that you're specifically referring to product management, which is a more business-focused role that's involved in understanding the requirements, prioritizing them, doing product strategy. And I don't think there's any silver bullet on making that transition. There are skills that need to be developed. If you're interested, I would suggest that you read Inspired, which has a number of practices that will help you learn what are the critical success factors, what's the kind of work that a product manager typically does. And other than that, I would say that if you're an engineer or a data scientist, then it's the good foundation to be a product manager down the line, because the market is evolving in a way that there is a demand for technical product managers. These are product managers who are very comfortable and adept at engineering and or data science, as opposed to just pure business product managers, who are people who are really the standard with standard commerce or business administration backgrounds. So I would say it's easier to transition from a technical role to a product management than to just go and just to make the transition from a pure business role. What I would suggest if someone is interested in that is to first join a product team as opposed to an internal data science team that just does internal stuff. A good first step would be to join a product team that needs a data scientist, understand how products are built, how they are scaled, and then the transition from a data science role to a product management role is much easier because you now have a shipped product under your belt.
Thanks for that, Adnan. And just as a follow-up to that, can you touch a little bit upon what are the different roles that are available in the fields of analytics? So, there's data scientists, there are product managers, which are the more mainstream ones. But, just for the audience to know what other options they have to be in that sector.
So, there are actually, the field is so varied now. That there are new types of roles that are coming up all the time, and every company has its own perspective. The key categories that I see are there's obviously the data scientist role, I think there's so much hype around data science that the other roles that are equally valuable, perhaps in some contexts even more valuable, tend to get ignored. One very valuable role is data engineering role, and associated with that is an ML engineering role, right? So those it's a similar type of skill set, data engineering and ML engineering. That's really important. There's a role which is also very important, which is a data analyst role, because a data scientist actually does model building. And now what's happening is that with libraries that are now coming out, that the barrier to doing model building is getting lowered every day, just in terms of the skills that you need and the computational enablement that you need. Everything is getting easier. So you actually don't need to be a PhD data scientist or a data scientist with advanced degrees to be able to do model building work. So as this landscape is evolving, what we see is the roles that are most important right now for the types of solutions that actually get shipped into production. There is data engineering and ML engineering roles are very important. Data analyst roles are very important, and there's another category of roles called analytics engineers. Analytics engineers are a cross between a data engineer and a data analyst. That's another really important role as well.
Thanks, Adnan. We have another question from Samath, who says, this might be a little vague, but while climbing the corporate ladder, is a data scientist more likely to succeed or a product manager? My intuition would be a product manager, since ultimately he's made a product that has delivered the company some value.
So depending on the company, there are different career paths. There is a fully defined career path for data scientists to rise up in organizations. You could start as an associate data scientist, senior, executive, distinguished, right? So the whole career path for data science, depending on the company that you're in. If you're a company that values data science and that has an established career path for data science, then it's a very valuable area to specialize in, but it's got to be the right type of company. It's a company that values data science, is a company that actually generates a lot of data from it, generates a lot of data as part of their business, and uses that data to drive business value. So in that case, data science is a very valuable and lucrative profession. The product management roles tend to be more business focused. So they are. It's in most organizations there is a well-defined path for product managers, and yes, I would agree that product managers have a very direct responsibility for the financial metrics associated with a particular product, and that gives product managers a fair bit of visibility. So in my mind, in a lot of companies, product management is a good path. But in my mind, it's less about climbing the corporate ladder. because climbing the corporate ladder, it sounds a lot like the command and control hell that I just mentioned, which is the death of good product development. I would actually suggest the focus should be on where can you make the most impact given your interest areas. And if it's data science, then deepening your skills in data science makes for a very successful and distinguished career. And you can do the same thing as a product manager. So I don't think it's either or.
Also, so as we've seen, especially in the last 2 years, with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of governments had to, come up with apps for, COVID monitoring, all of that. Do you think there is a role for data science in governments? I know, and how do you compare that from the developed world to more, emerging economies like Pakistan?
Well, I think data science is essential to government, and because we also need to think of data science a bit more broadly, because when it's because the challenge with the role, how it's used very broadly. So even the people who do advanced data analysis go by the term data scientist, as are those who do real model building. But regardless of where you are on the spectrum, whether you're doing advanced data analysis using statistical methods or using more advanced techniques like deep learning and so forth, the role of this specialization in government is exceptionally important, because that's how good policies get made. Good policies are data driven. There's always modeling that's required to see how a policy is going to play out, whether it's econometric modeling or statistical modeling. In the pandemic, the advanced countries should modeling epidemiological model. And when I look at advanced economies, then the departments like statistics, like in Canada, there's StatCan, the Statistics Canada. It's probably one of the largest employers of statisticians, data scientists, data analysts in the country. It is, and when I contrast that with emerging countries, the emerging markets, then the same emphasis isn't quite there, but it should be.
Thanks, Adnan. And just lastly, a more broader question is, considering you're leading products in a fintech, how do you stay on top of new technologies, right? We keep hearing new ones. I mean, there's Web 3.0, there's crypto, there's NFTs. Like, how do you constantly ensure that you are on top of those technologies? Do you always try to incorporate them in your products, or how does that go?
I think that's a great question. It's something that I think about, because everything's happening at such a fast pace that it is a challenge. And in my case, it's there are two things that I like doing. One is actually looking at reading long form content. So these are not articles. These are not like short blog posts. These are long form pieces on specific industry trends, right? And these, just because of the subscriptions that I've set up, these end up on my feeds, and that's what I go through to really understand how a particular segment is shaping up. Other than that, so this is really to understand not just the latest buzzword, but to really understand it in depth. The other thing is, for the technologies that I have an active interest in, you just have to roll up your sleeves and actually you actually have to write code if the technology is actually something that is amenable to that. You understand what are the SDKs, set up the environment, and write simple applications to understand the gist of how it works. Because once you start to do that, then a lot of the BS, a lot of the vaporware evaporates, and you actually see what the technology can do.
Thanks for that, Adnan. We're also at the end of the session. So thank you so much for your time. I think this has been very, very insightful. If you have any recommendations for readings, the articles that you're talking about, would be great if you can send them across. We'll post them on our socials. So if people are interested, they can also, start reaching out for that.
Sounds good. Happy to do that.
Ashraf, there's just one question that has just come in from Mohammed Ali. Maybe we can ask that question.
Sure.
As well.
Okay, so Adnan, he says, what do you think a data analyst in a large product company can do to stand out and help the company build an even better product?
There is data analysts do a range of things. So data analysts can be building dashboards and metrics that executives see, and that's important because that's all enabling executives to self-serve. The second part of what data analysts do is ad hoc analysis, which is to understand what the business problem is, and which is suppose you want to a more poorly defined business problem, which is, hey, we need to improve engagement, or we need to actually understand why costs are escalating in a particular area. You take one of these poorly formed problems that management is struggling with, and then as ambiguous as these problems are, do ad hoc analysis and tell a story. And that storytelling, and this essentially storytelling with data that includes intuitive visualizations. This is how data analysts stand out, and this is how the company can eventually stand out as well, because the company is going to be with the help of good data analysts who understand the industry, who can work with ambiguous, poorly structured problem statements. So the management gets clarity, so the company gets better positioned. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is that data analysts can also help develop visualizations depending on what the company, what the product company does. But product companies often do deal with a fair bit of data that the company generates or that the customers using the application generate, and visualizing this data in a manner that is meaningful for the end user is another way that data analysts can contribute to the success of the company. So I think data analysts it's a very high impact role, and I actually put data analysts at par with data scientists in terms of the value of this area of this role, and in terms of the impact that it can have.
Thanks, Adnan. I think those were the last of the questions. So thank you once again for taking out the time and doing this.
Of course,
Jahan,
happy to be here.
Any closing remarks?
No, just my thanks as well for doing this. I think some of the questions were good too. We'll be running this. I think we'll put this on our YouTube channel because I got a couple of comments saying this was a very useful session for us. So I think people who weren't able to join will have the option of also benefiting from it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
Okay,
Adnan.
thanks.
Thanks,
Okay,
Adnan. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.